In the year 114 BC, 3 women stood accused in Rome. Their names were Aemilia, Lysania, and Marcia. They wore the distinctive white robes of the Vestal Virgins, priestesses who had served Rome's sacred flame for years. The charge against them was incest and violation of their vow of chastity. The penalty was ancient and absolute. They would be buried alive. But this wasn't a simple story of oppression. These women held power that no other Roman women possessed. They could own property without male guardians. They could write their own wills. Condemned criminals who crossed their path were automatically pardoned. They had front-row seats at public spectacles, and their testimony in court required no oath. Their word was considered inherently truthful. To understand what happened in 114 BC, we need to understand what a Vestal Virgin actually was, and why Rome created this extraordinary priesthood in the first place. According to Roman tradition, King Numa Pompilius established the Vestal Order in the 8th or 7th century BC. He created 6 priestesses, exactly 6, whose sole responsibility was maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. This wasn't mere symbolism to the Romans. The eternal flame represented Rome's life force itself. If the fire died, Rome would fall. The selection process was extraordinarily specific. Candidates had to be between 6 and 10 years old, prepubescent, physically perfect. Initially, only patrician families could provide vestals. Both parents had to be alive and respectably married. The selection ceremony was called captio, capture or taking. When the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, selected a girl, something remarkable happened. She was legally freed from patria potestas, the father's power that governed every other Roman woman's life. She didn't transfer from her father's control to a husband's control, as all other Roman women did. She became something unprecedented, a woman who belonged to no man. The Roman historian Cicero records the formula spoken during the ceremony. I take you, a martyr, to be a Vestal priestess, to perform the rites which it is lawful for a Vestal to perform on behalf of the Roman people. Every Vestal was called a martyr beloved at her induction, creating a new identity separate from her family. Her hair was styled in the senicrine 6 braids wound around her head, a style otherwise worn only by brides on their wedding day. This was intentional. A Vestal occupied the liminal space between daughter and wife, suspended in transition forever. The historian Suetonius records that by the time of Emperor Augustus, families actively tried to avoid having daughters selected. Augustus himself claimed he would have offered his own granddaughter to shame reluctant aristocrats into cooperation. Why this resistance? Because once selected, a girl committed to 30 years, 10 learning her duties, 10 performing them, 10 teaching younger priestesses, 30 years of virginity, 30 years without marriage or children. But in exchange, Vestals received unprecedented privileges. They could own and sell property independently, rights denied even to senators' wives. They possessed sacrosanctitas, the same legal protection as tribunes. Assaulting a Vestal meant death. They traveled with a lictor clearing their path, just like magistrates. They stored wills and state documents, including emperors' testaments. They witnessed treaties and mediated between political factions. In 143 BC, a Vestal named Claudia used her sacrosanct status to protect her brother's triumph when a tribune tried to stop it. The tribune couldn't touch her without committing a capital crime. This was real political power in a society that gave women almost none. The House of the Vestals stood in the Roman Forum, at the heart of Rome's religious and political life. It was a large complex with living quarters, courtyards, and the round temple of Vesta itself, which housed the sacred flame. The 6 Vestals lived communally. Their daily routine centered on maintaining the fire and performing rituals crucial to Rome's survival. Their vow was absolute, complete chastity for 30 years. No sexual contact of any kind. The penalty for breaking this vow was death, but not by execution. Romans believed that spilling a Vestal's blood would pollute the city, so they developed a punishment that technically didn't kill her. They buried her alive. The Greek historian Plutarch, writing centuries later but drawing on earlier sources, described the process in detail. A convicted Vestal was dressed in burial clothes and placed on a covered litter. She was carried through the forum in complete silence. At a place near the Colline Gate, an underground chamber had been prepared with a bed, a lamp, bread, water, and milk, just enough, Plutarch notes, to absolve Romans of directly causing her death. The Vestal was led down, the entrance was sealed, earth was heaped over it until nothing remained visible. The Romans claimed they hadn't killed her, they had simply placed her underground with provisions. What happened after was between her and the gods. The year 114 BC was a time of profound anxiety in Rome. Wars with Germanic tribes were going badly. Rumors circulated of legions destroyed. Rome's Italian allies grew increasingly restive. Political factions fought bitterly. The old certainties were crumbling. Then a prodigy occurred. A young woman, daughter of a knight, was struck and killed by lightning. In Roman belief, lightning wasn't random, it was Jupiter's message, a sign of divine displeasure. Something had disrupted Rome's relationship with the gods. The haruspices, priests who interpreted omens, consulted their sacred texts and delivered their verdict. The Vestals must be examined. 3 Vestals, Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia, were accused of breaking their chastity vows. The accusation came from a slave. In Roman society, slaves normally couldn't testify against free persons, but in cases involving vestals, regular rules were suspended. The pollution they supposedly caused was too dangerous. The Pontifical College, which held jurisdiction over religious crimes, investigated and reached a verdict. Aemilia was guilty. Licinia and Marcia were innocent. Aemilia was buried alive, but the Roman people weren't satisfied. The crisis hadn't passed. The gods remained angry, anyone could see that. Popular pressure forced the Senate to establish a special court under Lucius Cassius Longinus to retry the case. This was extraordinary. The Pontifical College's authority over vestals was supposed to be absolute. The special court reached a different conclusion. All three were guilty. Licinia and Marcia were sentenced to burial. Their alleged lovers, young men whose names survive in the historical record, were beaten to death in the Forum. Here's the crucial point. There's no solid evidence any of these people were actually guilty. No witness testified to specific acts. The evidence apparently consisted of young men visiting the house of the vestals and the priestesses talking with men at religious festivals. They were convicted, essentially, of being young women who interacted normally with young men in Roman society. Rome needed scapegoats. The gods needed appeasement. The people needed to feel something was being done about the crisis. Three women who had dedicated their lives to serving Rome, who held extraordinary power and privilege, were executed for crimes they very likely didn't commit. This reveals the dark heart of the vestal system. The same privilege that gave them power also made them perfect sacrifices when things went wrong. They were separate from normal society, liminal, ambiguous, neither fully women nor children, neither citizens with families nor slaves without rights. When Rome needed someone to blame, someone whose death would carry weight, vestals were available, and it happened repeatedly throughout Roman history. In 216 BC, during the darkest days of the Second Punic War after the catastrophic defeat at Cannae, two vestals were convicted of unchastity. One committed suicide, the other was buried alive. In 73 BC, a vestal named Fabia endured a traumatic trial that destroyed her reputation, even after acquittal. In 90 AD, Emperor Domitian, obsessed with restoring traditional morality, had the chief vestal Cornelia buried alive without trial. Notice the pattern. These trials cluster around moments of crisis, military defeat, political upheaval, regime transitions. When Rome felt threatened, vestals went on trial. The historian Holt Parker has argued that vestals functioned as ritual scapegoats. Their deaths were meant to purify Rome, restore peace with the gods. Their guilt or innocence was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that they were ritually pure, set apart, and therefore effective sacrifices. Their extraordinary privileges made them even more effective as scapegoats. The higher they stood, the more their fall meant. An ordinary woman's death carried little significance. But when a vestal died, a woman who had been sacred, who held power, other women couldn't imagine her death had weight. It was genuine sacrifice, surrendering something truly valuable. After 30 years, a vestal was free to leave, marry, and live privately. But very few did. We have records of retired vestals, some married in their late 30s or 40s, well past normal marriage age. Most remained unmarried, living independently on their accumulated wealth, supporting younger vestals or funding public works. Inscriptions honored these women, but you can hear the awkwardness in them. Roman society struggled to categorize women who no longer fit any normal role. They were honored but treated as curiosities. Free at 40 after 30 years of restriction wasn't the same as freedom at 20. The Vestal Virgins embodied a profound paradox in Roman society. They held power no other women possessed, yet that power came with suffocating restrictions and extraordinary vulnerability. They were both privileged and trapped, honored and expendable. Their story reveals how societies create categories of power that simultaneously elevate and endanger those who occupy them. Rome granted these women unprecedented authority, then sacrificed them when maintaining that authority served a greater need, the psychological need to believe someone was responsible, that someone could be punished, that the gods could be appeased and order restored. Claude is